Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Jo Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Very warm welcome to today's episode where we're talking about how to coach conflict. Now, talk about coaching conflict. We're talking about how to support clients when they might be bringing topics to the coaching sessions, which are around conflict or tension that exist or are arising in a relationship or a number of relationships in their life. This is a common topic that comes up in coaching sessions. And so today, hopefully, we're going to be able to share with you some useful discussion and practical strategies for supporting clients with this.
Yeah, and I would say, Jo, it's not just clients, is it? Because actually, people who are interested in developing their coaching skills, I would say conflict is probably one of the biggest thing that people come to you for. I think about being in the workplace or just being in relationship and in different family systems. What are the things that people come, when you're down in a cafe, with a friend and you're catching up, and what are the things that you talk about? It's often the different conflicts that are arising in their life that are causing them to feel probably something other than joy and fulfillment, ultimately. So I think it's such a broad topic that so many people can benefit from around. So what are the different ways then that you can help and support people when they are experiencing conflict? And I would start by saying that it's not necessarily with a view to resolving the conflict. That has to come from the person that you're with. So not all people bring conflict because they're looking to resolve it. Some people bring conflict because they might be looking to understand how it's arisen. They may be looking to understand how they can just walk away, not necessarily resolve it with the person or the situation, but just to resolve it. So I think resolution can look different for different people when conflict is arising.
Sometimes people bring that tension or conflict in relationships because they want to know how to tolerate it. So they may have already evaluated in a work context, they can't afford to leave their job, or they just don't feel emotionally resourced to look for another job and go through those processes, or they love their job there and everybody that they work with, but there is this one relationship which, as you said, Zoe, they don't really understand why, but there is this tension in it, and they want to know how to be able to cope with that. I would say that in some way, all conflict in external relationships reflects a level of internal conflict. And so as coaches, because we support our clients in working on the things that they can control, we start with self, really. So that would be a hack, might you call it, around how to coach conflict. And also to say that conflict is not inherently a bad thing. And sometimes the judgments that as society we may place around conflict and the associations that we have with that can lead us to, as human beings, into unhelpful strategies. So, for example, if you were to ask somebody what do they think of when they think of the word conflict, they might say violence, as an immediate thing. And when you think of violence, what do you think of? Being under threat. So what happens when we're under threat is we tend to go in on ourselves, don't we? And we tend to harden up and get a little bit fixed, and so on. So some of the work that we might do with clients is around, what are the learning opportunities? We want to make sure that they're safe, that this is, a situation that the client is safe in, because there is a continuum, obviously, and it depends on the individual.
I think what we're saying here of how to coach conflict is what is the goal in relation to the conflict that the client is bringing? What do they want to get out of bringing this into the coaching space? And I was just, as you were talking there, I was reminded of, it was a meme or a quote that I saw online, and it came from Ricky Gervais, or allegedly, he may not have ever said this. And it's a bit sweary, so I'll just give you the essence of what it was. And it was something along the lines of, who are we to believe that we can walk through life never upsetting or, basically getting into conflict with anybody else? How naive of us to believe that that is an experience of life. And I think, when we talk about conflict, it's really important to normalize it. Like it's a really normal part of human existence. And actually, if you look at children do conflict really well most of the time because they're learning the different boundaries of what is and isn't okay. And they push boundaries naturally as they're growing up to make sense of the world. And so, in many ways, conflict is a making sense of byproduct of what is happening. It's making sense of how do I think and how do I feel and what are my boundaries and where can I compromise and what's okay for me and what's not. And so, really, in coaching, we are helping clients in that sense making skill that we have inherently as children, in the world. So, yeah, thought I'd just share that.
One of the things to be careful of, I think, in these situations with clients is sometimes you might have a client that will repeat over and over to you in a number of sessions the same story about how bad, for example, a situation is, or how unfair or how unjust, and so on, a particular relationship or interaction is that they have with somebody else. And there is that balance between sometimes the client needs to share their story to be able to like almost externalize it, look at it, reflect on it, and then that can be helpful. But sometimes, where there is that repetition, it's almost like there is a solidifying, of this. It's like a reminding themselves. And when a client experiences something like that, for some clients, it can remind them of an early trauma that they have experienced, and so part of that repetition can be linked to that. So we need to be thinking about our trauma-informed approaches to coaching. So that goal, what is it that they want to, like, what does success look like? So you've shared with me that you've got this this situation at work. Let's focus on that. What does success look like at the end of today's session? And your client might say, I just really want to, I have to be able to, like, what I'm doing isn't working. And I feel really angry a lot of the time. I don't like that feeling. I want to be able to feel differently about this situation. So obvious things that you can do. So why does conflict arise? Conflict in its simplest form, you might say, arises when two people have different values. So when we say values, we're talking about needs. So I don't know, let's try and give an example for ourselves. So we could say, if Zoe and I, let's talk about the podcast. So if I had a need to, or let's say I thought the business had a need for the podcast to go viral. And I might think, I really think we should take this action. And Zoe might not be focused on the podcast getting out to a bigger audience. Zoe might say, actually, I want to ensure that we are doing more demos in our podcasts. So you could say, well, that has potential in the scenario that I'm making up here for there to be tension between us. And so if either of us were to go to a coach, we might be expressing a frustration in that we're not making progress or making decisions because and that's really frustrating. And the coach might help us to understand that both of us have different needs. What might happen and can happen is that the client might not have expressed their need or explained why something is so important to them to the other person. So part of the work with the client can be helping them to understand what is the need that is underlying the experience that you're having in this relationship. Once they've got clarity on that, they may then be able to articulate that, and they might choose to articulate that in a professional way to the other person. Say, hey, arrange a meeting with them and just say, just wanted to chat about the project that we're working on, etc., etc. So that's one different way, helping them to understand their values.
Another thing that a client may bring conflict for is resolution. I know I mentioned at the start it may not be, but a client could come bringing a situation to coaching, say, I just need to resolve this conflict. And this conflict might be a relationship conflict, or it might be, something else. And here as a coach, we have to be careful because, if coachees are setting their sights on something that isn't within their control, you can't really coach it, because we cannot help a client to resolve a conflict if the other person is less or unwilling to resolve it with that person. So we may need to do some reframing around, yes, that's great. It's great to have your sights on that, but actually, what are we in control of? And here's why we're so passionate about emotions coaching, because actually, at the source of conflict, really what you're talking about are the emotions that you're experiencing as being a part of that conflict. And that is the part that you are in control of, that you can work to resolve in some way. So it may be about being able to sleep at night. So the client might think, I need to resolve this conflict because it's keeping me awake at night. Okay, you could go into sleep strategies, but that's probably not going to help you. Like, what's the reason that you're awake at night? It's probably an anxiety around the conflict. There may also be beliefs. Many people will have a need to be liked. It's a pretty common human need. And as Joe was talking about needs there. And so conflict can be really triggering from an emotional perspective, because you are sitting in the discomfort of knowing that there is somebody or someone or various people or things out there that really conflicts with your need to be liked. And that is probably going to be feelings around feeling safe, either in the world or, in the systems that you're a part of. So, helping a client with the emotions that are associated with the conflict is within their control. And that can then lead to practical strategies around the decisions that they can make. So, if, for example, it is about safety, it may be that that person can reach a point where they decide to walk away rather than actually stay and try to resolve the conflict. Walking away may be a resolution that they that is more in alignment with what they need. So this need identification piece that Joe was talking about, and the emotions that you hear us talk a lot about on this podcast, are two really important levers when working with conflict and strategy.
Yeah, I mean, doing beliefs work, with a client about conflict, for example, like what are the beliefs, the empowering beliefs, but also what are maybe some of the limiting beliefs that might be keeping them stuck or generating the emotional experience, which is also keeping them stuck. Likelihood is they've never explored that in their life. And that's what we do in coaching, is we hold and create a space for clients to shine a light, shine a torch into these unexplored areas to help them to find a way forward with the situation that they want to be different in some way. And that's why people come to coaching, is there is something that they want to be different. They might want more of, less of, or they want to be able to maintain it. And they're coming to coaching for that. Transactional analysis as an approach, a field, a methodology, a coaching psychology, whatever you want to label it as, is really like a really great place for various resources to be able to incorporate into your coaching practice when you are supporting clients around conflict resolution. So there is a tool or an activity called the OK Corral. We've got drivers, ego states. Recognition is obviously often comes up in conflict, because if you think about needs, often it is a case that an individual feels that their needs have not been recognized, but they also have perhaps not explained or are not familiar with their needs for recognition. So helping them to get some clarity on that can really help. So if I work backwards through those names that I just chucked into the conversation there, ego states is a model, you might be familiar with it as parent, adult, and child. And the idea is that really in organizations, the expectation typically from a cultural perspective is that we communicate with each other from an adult to adult ego state. And the adult to adult is when we are communicating from the here and now. So not with the echoes of things earlier in our life, but also with the knowledge, skills, and experience that we have. And we are solution focused. Parent can be split into two. So we can be that controlling or authoritative parent, or we can be the very nurturing or overly nurturing parent. And sometimes when we are involved in conversations with other people, there will be a dynamic that exists, or we'll get into a pattern where we might step out consciously or unconsciously out of our adult ego state, if we're using the coaching terms here, into a parental role, which may be accepted or rejected by the other person. And that's sometimes where conflict occurs. And then so we've got parent ego state, adult ego state, and then child. And child can be either free child, so think of that as wild child, do what I like because I want to, don't care about the repercussions, or adapted child, which is I understand that I need to behave in certain ways in certain places, and I will do that. So that can be a model that you can work through with your client to help them understand what's happening here, how might myself and the other person have been experiencing each other, and to help our client really understand what do they think, feel, and how do they behave when they are in their adult ego state. What are the beliefs? What are the values that they're honoring? So you can bring all of that stuff together in that particular model.
TA is a great place to go for working through conflict. And I know you've dropped a few activities there. So, worth going and doing some reading and some research around those. I think there's a word I also would like to share around intersectionality and conflict. And you'll hear us talk about, working with a client on the things that they can control and helping them to resolve that internal conflict. The reality for many people is that there are systemic biases that are outside of their control that affect their experience of the world on a day-to-day basis. And so when it comes to conflict and internal conflict, as a coach, it can also be dishonoring to start to talk about resolving that, because that is not necessarily something that is easy for that person to do and kind of influence them throughout their whole life. So when it comes to developing your coaching skills, so there's a being a beginner coach and building your coaching skills, and then there's the workplace coaching and helping. And I think as you progress along your career, it's starting to really lean into the systemic lens when conflict comes up in coaching conversations, and just inviting that into the conversation around, what are the different systems that you're a part of that are that may be influencing how you're experiencing this right now. Because to be able to see it and to have a space to be able to talk about it can be liberating in that moment, even if it's not something that can be achieved outside of the coaching space. So there's a subtlety, I think, with conflict that is, yes, you can move into it in the spirit of all conflict can be resolved. There's a way through everything. And if we just coach in these ways, like growth mindset, power through, and that's not always the reality. And again, I think that comes back to emotions and helping clients to really express their voice, their experience, and the emotions that are a part of, and then sensitively being able to support the client with, so now that you know that, and now that you express that, what are the choices that you want to make given the situation or the system that you're a part of.
Yeah, it's really important. And also coming up for me, hearing you talk there, was around the term part of. So when an individual is experiencing inner conflict, you might experience that as a coach with the client going, you might even label it as resistance. It's like, we've done all this work and you've got this bit, but then the client's like, and what they might not be able to articulate, but you might be able to offer as a way to check in, is conflict is often experienced by somebody as part of me feels this or thinks this, and part of me thinks or feels that. And that they find it hard to commit to, taking action or even almost progressing in the conversation, because there are two parts of themselves that are currently in conflict. And that can feel really unpleasant to somebody. And actually, lots of clients come to coaching because they're in conflict with themselves. Part of them thinks and feels this, part of them thinks and feels that, and they don't know which bit to trust. Or they think it's got to be that or that. But maybe there's also an intuition that maybe it doesn't need to be entirely that or that, but I don't know what to do about this. And so in some ways, what we do as coaches is we help to, if you're watching some video, you'll see my hands if you're not, but to reintegrate those two bits together. I won't go into detail now around like the whole theory around parts, but just to really call that out. And the other thing that was coming into my mind was around sometimes the coach feels in conflict. And that can be, you feel in conflict because you feel sometimes like your ego showing up and you think, I know the answers. Oh gosh, we've only got this amount of time. Should I just tell them? Like, is it okay for me to just tell them? Would that be mentoring? Would that still be coaching? But my client in the chemistry conversation said, they'd really like me to, sort of like be able to help and guide them. And did I agree to, all that type of conflict can come up by. And also when you're thinking, shall I ask this question next? Or shall I not ask that question? How long shall I hold the silence for? And so being able to check in, what is happening for me when I'm having this full internal dialogue? Am I entirely present with my client? What is it that is causing this conflict, this inner conflict within me? And is that something that I would like to take to supervision to be able to explore?
So we've meandered through conflict, haven't we? And I think I might have said on the last podcast, like, oh, this is a training in itself. And I think here we are again. We could talk for hours about how to support clients with conflict, because conflict, there's no one definition. There's so many different types of conflict that come into the space, and each warrants its own approach to helping the client with that. And you would decide that in the moment through being your creative and talented self. So if you want to learn more about CPD programs that can support you with coaching clients, coaching emotions, come and check out the resources on our website, igcompany.co.uk. And please do, if you've enjoyed this episode, rate and subscribe to the podcast. It really helps us with keeping going, doing podcast episodes every Monday for you, and also reaching, leaders, coaches, and people interested in coaching to find and listen to this resource.